So now we are going to see something called document.querySelector. Okay, so we already saw that something like this document is there, right? So what happens is that in this document you have a method called, if you click, then you will have this method called query selector, right? This query selector method, if you hover over it, then you will see that this query selector method, it receives some selector. Okay, so what happens is that it returns, you pass it some selector, and it returns the first element within the document that matches that specified selector. Okay, so so this selector word is familiar, right? And it is familiar because this is exactly what we learned in CSS. In CSS, whatever we did, like simple div or dot class or hash div, whatever, right? So those things are CSS selectors, and that is the exact syntax what you have to pass here, which means that here you can pass something like div, or you can pass some dot class, right? Or you can use some hash id, or you can use hash id dash arrow dot class. All the syntax which we learned in CSS, that is directly available here for our consumption. Okay, so that is one thing. Second thing is that this thing will use, so let's say simple, right now for simplicity we are trying to target let's say this p. So in CSS, how do you target this? Like simply p, right? Or you can have some idea also, we will see that later. But simply right now, simply if we have p, then we should be able to target this. Fine. Okay. But then what does it return? It returns the first element within the document that matches the specified selector. If no match is found, then null is returned. Okay, so, which means that let's say I some h1 tag which is not there, right, anywhere. Okay, so if I do something like this, then it will return me null. But if h1 tag would have been there, then it would have returned me that h1 element. Which h1 element? The first h1 element. So let's say there are multiple h1 elements, then the first one it will return, right? So it returns the first element which is matching. If you want to match, like if you want to get all the elements, then there is a way for it, we will see next. But right now it will match the first element, and this element will be that element if it is available, any one of them, if at least it is available. If nothing is available, no h1 element is available, then it will be null. This thing, if no match is found, then it will be null. Okay, so right now what should be the answer? Since there is no h1 element, so as expected you will get null. Okay, now we want to target let's say this p. Okay, so instead of h1, let's use p. So document, in this document, please give me the p tag, and which p tag? Whichever is the first available, right? So there is only one. We will repeat this right now, and we'll see that if more than one p tag is there, then what happens? Obviously the first one will be returned, but right now this element will be this p tag. Okay, so let's print that element, and if you print, you see that you're still getting null. You're not getting that thing. Why? And there is a reason for that. So when you people are also doing on your systems, you see what happens when this document is loading. Then it is like loading from top to down, and it saw the JavaScript here, and it executed the JavaScript, and it executed this code, and there is no p tag, right? Because p tag is not created right now. Okay, so right when the JavaScript is parsing here, there is no p tag. So how it can give you p tag? And that is why you are getting null. Okay, so there are ways for it. If you are writing it here or like before this, then you have to wait for the document to load. You have to wait for the document to load. So there are ways in which you can create a callback function, sort of like set timeout is there, no, right? That you call me after 1 second. So similarly, there are event listeners where you can say me that call this function after the document has loaded. So when that will happen, then you will get this perfectly, right? But right now, if you have not put in some handler like that, then simply this thing is running, and this thing by now there is no p tag, right? That's why this will not work. So we will learn about event listeners later, but right now what you can do is that you can simply just cut this, and you can paste this at the end of the body. So this is also a common convention. So scripts are generally put inside the head, or they are put at the end of the body tag, but inside the body. It should be inside the body, right? Not outside the body. Now why why is the end not the beginning? So there are some reasons for that, for performance reasons, that what is the order of parsing, all those things. But just as a rule of thumb, you can understand that this is the way in which it will be done here. So if we do something like this, then by now these elements are created in the DOM, right? So now when this code will run here, so it will be able should be able to see my P. Okay, so let's run this code. Yeah, so you can see that this P is there, right? This P is printed. And now let's say I have something more. So let's say I have H1 tag also, right? And let's get H1. So you'll say that this H1 I am getting, right? So the point is that, and you can get both also. So let's say this is element 1, this is element 2, 1 is H1, 1 is P, and then 1 is H1, right? So the P I am getting and the H1 I am getting, and then element 1, element 2. Yeah. So the point is that all these things you can clearly get that this will be printed here. Different browsers will represent it in a different manner, but anyways, we are not going to we are going to do something with it, right, rather than simply having a look at it. So the point is that we are getting these things, right? Now now the one of the most common things, so for now let's have only P, let's have only P. And one of the most common things is like what is inside this P. And what happens that you can do something like dot inner HTML and inner text. So we'll see inner text and HTML later, but for simplicity right now, you simply see that whatever is inside this, a textual representation of that as a string is returned by dot inner text, which means that if you see S and type of S, if you see, then you will see something like this. You see this hello world and string. So inside this P, you can see that this hello world is printed, right? And for simplicity, for clarification, I also printed the type to show you that the data type which it returns is string. Okay, okay, so that is fine, and there is no need of creating a separate variable right now. We know that it is string, so we'll start with this only. Okay, so now we know that yeah, we have a P and we have got its contents. So that is how we are getting started. Okay, so and one of the things which we discussed is that it returns the first element. So let's prove that. So let's say there are multiple ones. This is hello world 1, this is hello world 2, this is hello world 3. Okay, then what does it return? You can see that it returns hello world 1, and that's why it clarifies that it returns 1. Now what happens when this thing is like let's say this thing is, let's say, inside some div, some other section is there, and inside that section this thing is there, then what do you think, what will be returned? Will this be returned or this thing will be returned? So we see that we still get hello world 1, right? So the DOM traversal which we are doing using this query selector, it does something called depth first pre-order tree traversal. Now you don't need to get into this technical term, but you should just understand is that what happens is that if it encounters some node like div, then it will keep on going deep inside it, and then it will come out, and then it will go to the next, right? So that's why if something like this is there, then it will be encountered first, right? Provided that it is even if at the deep, but it is there earlier, because if something like this will be there, it is inside deep but it is here, but earlier only you got this thing, right? In this case hello world 2 will be printed. You can see that hello world 2 is printed because that is the thing which we got, right? One more thing to note is that this inner HTML is not just read only. Actually you can so rather than, let's say, printing, let's say I am modifying this. So let's say Ola, right? So what was it earlier? So let's say I don't modify anything. Then what P firstly I'm talking about? I'm talking about this P, hello world 2. Now hello world 2 is first, and then hello world 1, and then hello world 3, right? This is how it is, right? The element which I am getting is this element, because query selector which is giving me the first thing, right? Now this thing is I'm trying to modify that. So that element's inner text is equal to, I'm trying to set something else value, which means that this here hello world 2 is there, right? I'm trying to set this hello world 2 to Ola. So this thing should change, right? And that is what I'm trying to do here. So if you run this code and refresh it, then you see that that has become Ola, right? So programmatically, this is the first time when you are seeing that programmatically from JavaScript you have modified this thing. And now all the JavaScript which you have learned till now, everything is at your disposal, which means that, okay, I know that there is something called set timeout, right? And set timeout is there. Then what it does is that after some time, 1500 milliseconds, let's say, it does something. So what I will do is that after 1500 milliseconds, I will do something like this, right? Then what will happen? That if earlier, let's say something like this, like it was normally there, right? And once I deployed this code and somebody loads my page and refreshes, then after 1.5 seconds this thing has changed, okay? And so basically whatever you have learned in JavaScript, now like pieces are coming together, right? So how now you can create your do your own creativity and do whatever you want with this HTML page, right? So for example, let's say normal things were there, and this was hello world, this was hello world, right? And what I want to do is that after 1 millisecond, I don't want to overwrite it with something else. Rather, I want to do something like in template literal, this thing is there, and hyphen, like say XYZ. I'm trying to do this. So in this case, hello world will be there, but hello world hyphen XYZ, it has happened after 1.5 seconds, right? So you can clearly see that anything you can do, okay? Yeah. Next thing is that we have also seen that this thing, this queries, this P part, right? This thing can be anything, right? So okay, somehow I'm like modifying first one, but I want to modify the second one, you know, so I can do my thing, right? So let's say I can write something like id is equal to my para or something like this, right? And then I can use this id in like in css you can style that. Similarly from javascript you can target this. From css you can target this using hash my para. Similarly using from dom from javascript also you can target this using hash para, okay, hash my para, okay. So now instead of this, right, I'm targeting this thing, okay. So I am trying to get that element which is having id my para, which is having id my para, and then take whatever the contents is there and then append that content with additional xyz, okay. So now if you see, then after 1.5 second it is coming here, right? So all the things, all the syntax which we learned in selectors, everything can be applied here, okay. So yeah, that should be a good beginning, and we and it has to be a valid selector, right? If the selector is not a valid selector, then so what is not a valid selector? So yeah, so let's say we know that something like div without dot or without something we write, then it is an element, right? So let's write div x, right, and let's try to run this, okay. So yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say, that um, these behaviors will be actually different across the browsers, right? So some browsers will silently ignore it, some browsers will throw the warning, right? But you can see that in this case they are not giving you warning, they are just silently giving you null. But some browsers might give you something else, right? But the idea is that it must be a valid css selectors. Otherwise yeah, it is on the browsers wish whether they want to inform you about the incorrect thing or not. But at least definitely whatever your expectation was there, that will not work as per the expectation if it is not a valid css selector string, okay. and and the syntax which I discussed on document.querySelector, that syntax is also available on elements also.